Hi, and welcome to RBP on JSB. I'm violinist Rachel Barton Pine, and today we're going to be discussing the first movement of Bach's Partita No. 1 in B minor, the Allemanda and its double. So each of the four movements of Bach's Partita No. 1 has a double. And what does this mean? Well, it's kind of like double the amount of notes. Basically, it's a 17th century practice of making a variation on a movement in what was known as division style. Division meaning dividing the notes into smaller and smaller portions. There's a famous book about how to do this, if you want to learn all about it, called The Division Viol, written for the viola da gamba, but it doesn't matter what instrument you play, you can still get the same information. There's also a collection of tunes and divisions on them called the Division Violin, also from the 17th century with lots of good stuff if you're interested. In any case, here's an example. Let's say we had a bit of a melody that goes like this. Okay, so those are, let's say, quarter notes. You might divide them into eighth notes. Or maybe add a little bit of rhythm. Something like that. Or divide them even further into 16th notes. So that's a division style of variation making. And so each of the movements of Bach's first partita is an exact variation of the movement itself. The other thing about the first partita is that all of the movements are dances. Well, so they are in all of the partitas, but these would not have been dances written to be danced to. In other words, Bach wasn't writing them for the practical purpose of accompanying actual dancing. But I think he wanted you to think of the dancer in your imagination. He was definitely, very strict about adhering to conventions of form, that would fit the choreography, even though there was no choreography to be fit. And so, therefore, I think you're supposed to maybe play for the dancer in your imagination. Now, what kind of dancing? Courtly dancing or what? In the case of the first partita, I actually think it's a little bit more like theatrical dancing. In other words, the type of dancing that would be done on stage. It sounds, very dramatic and extroverted, and so to think of that theatrical flavor like you're part of a whole orchestra playing in the pit while the dancers are doing their thing in front of an audience might be the way to capture the right character for this piece. So it's interesting that the two Allemandas in Bach's cycle are so very different. The D minor, of course, all in even notes. And then the B minor in dotted rhythms. Etc. And so it's just a different kind of music by the same title. They do have similarities. You definitely are going to the middle of the first bar. And similarly with the B minor, even though you might think that the very first opening should be the strongest chord, in fact, it's the middle of the bar. That has the more important chord, etc. So this da-da, da-da, it's kind of like saying ta-da. So if you think ta-da, you'll actually get exactly the right idea of how to play this gesture. It's not a hooked bowing. If you do want to hook, of course, that's perfectly understandable. If you're using a modern bow, it might feel more comfortable that way, or maybe you don't even want to take a Baroque approach. But nonetheless, make sure you don't start to play the movement in 8. It's definitely in 4. It should be in a tempo that works to play it in 4, and also with emphases that make it clear that it's not in 8. So you wouldn't play bar 2 with equal emphases, because that's just going to get boring and pedantic. So you want to make sure that you have the real beats a little bit more important than the inner beats. And in fact, the hooked bowing in a way works pretty well because you have down and up and down and up. and the ups are lighter than the downs. However, as I said, that's really not a Baroque bowing. You would achieve that with the separate bowings by grouping notes together. You wouldn't have certainly, French overture, you would play lots of circles again and again and again, but not something like this. You'd be more, maybe this, you might do a little couple of them, but this part with the groupings like that. So let's practice that. Let's do a B minor scale, working on our ta-das, just to make sure we get the idea. So little note at the frog, and then a big, shaped note. But wait a sec, you might be thinking, isn't that pickup a 16th note? 1, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Well, not exactly. It's supposed to be a feel. So it's not exactly a 30-second either. It's just a gesture. And if you think about it, look at the pickup to bar 1. That's an F sharp 16th note. Look at the pickup to bar 2. It's an F sharp 32nd. Well, why didn't Bach meticulously write a 32nd for his first pickup and then a double dot on the downbeat and then another 32nd and make it all equal? Well, you know what? He didn't bother because he didn't have to, because in 1720, people would have known to kind of make them all the same, that there wasn't a huge difference between your 16ths and your 32nds in this type of a context. There's a couple of places where it might be a true 16th, like the first cadence at the end of 11. You could certainly make this another da-da, or kind of da-da-da, kind of sing that last one with a longer 16th. Just mix it up, see what works, but don't feel like you're bound by the print, that the print is stricter than it actually is. So in any case, our gestures in the beginning, so we'd practice our scale just to get used to doing it over and over and really getting the feel of it. But then in particular spots, like the opening, you want to play just the treble voice so that you can know what it is that you want to achieve. Now, wait a sec. What about if you do a hook here, then you can have the Nachschlag after the trill happen right before beat 3 without having to retake. But actually, there's nothing wrong with retaking. We're not used to it these days, but since this is music paying homage to the 17th century, that would have been a very 17th century thing to do. Okay, so now let's add our big chords, but not actually make that change the effectiveness of our gesture. Probably have to practice that about 100 times till you find something you're satisfied with, or maybe 500 times, but you'll get it eventually. It's, of course, making sure that when you get to the top of the chord, that still feels, so it's like ta, da, ta, brr, da, instead of ta-da, but the overall effect is still ta-da. All right, and then another reason not to think of it in 8. Very often, even 1, 2, 3, and 4 are not equal. Look at bar 2. This E, nothing much going on there. Actually, we're on an up bow. We don't need to do this. Though we always could, but you don't have to. There, I guess it's not quite a hook. It's more like a lift. And then that A sharp is a stronger chord. The D not as strong, but going. So there you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, even within the big 4. So always thinking about which beats are more intense than others and making sure that it's always in 4. Take bar 4, for example, not. Again, that's getting pedantic, but give it gesture. You can make things lead even when they're phrasing off. In other words, you can still go to that next beat. Scotch snaps there, or in German music you would have called it the Lombardic rhythm. All right, then we've got an interesting thing where we have kind of a wrong rhythm a few places. Measure 5 is one of them, where Bach actually wrote a dotted eighth followed by a triplet, or I should say dotted eighth followed by 3 30-seconds, but he didn't write a little triplet mark over them. So it might be a dotted eighth and triplet 30 seconds, or it might be an almost dotted eighth, in other words, an eighth tied to 1 30-second and then 3 even 30 seconds, which is actually how a very well-known Urtext edition translates it, which I think is editorially irresponsible, because they're making a decision for you instead of giving you what you're supposed to get in Urtext, which is the clean print for you to make your own decision. How do we know that that was what Bach meant and not the triplet version? Or maybe it's kind of neither. It's just a gesture. He meant that this is more or less a long note, and this is more or less 3 little notes. And so mathematically what he wrote isn't accurate, but you know what to play, just whatever sounds good. He has 2 more of those with dotted 16ths followed by 3 64ths, same mathematical problem, one at the start of 18 and another at the start of 21. So again, and just kind of fit it in there, but don't be, dogmatic like, or, so you're not like counting it out like you would in the first movement of the G minor sonata when everything is exactly organized. This is more about feel. So whatever it ends up being, as long as it has the right effect, it's the right thing. Really do a lot of experimenting with which notes to join together, which notes to phrase off. Measure 6, for example, there's just lots of different stuff going on. So this kind of goes off, and then actually here, so I'm not, but because this is such a low point, I kind of join these all together, and then these 3. But, I might not have done it exactly like that last year, and I might do it a little differently next year, who knows. But always, think about what notes go with what notes, and above all, don't just because that's just completely uninteresting. You would never have done the same thing again and again and again and again and again, because that's not music, really. So one thing that he does that's really unnecessary for a purely instrumental, what you might call a concert dance, is he actually gives you the tags at the end of the movements. By this point in history, people actually weren't really allemanding anymore. It wasn't even a dance that people still danced to, but they still used the form in instrumental music. And so therefore, people often did away with the tags because it simply wasn't necessary if there was no choreography. But Bach really, again, is conjuring up in your imagination the dancers dancing. And so the last measure of each half is like a little add-on. I actually am not that familiar with what the true choreography of an Allemanda might have been, but in my imagination I imagine the dancers getting to that point and kind of bowing to each other. That might be totally wrong, but that's the way I kind of like to think of it for fun. Anyhow, I'll give you the last 2 bars of the first half. Oh, there's another one of those spots with the mathematically incorrect rhythms. So that's your real last note. And this other bit is like, but wait, there's more. And the same thing at the end. And then here's the little last extra bonus bit. So those tags would always have been done lightly. You might end more dramatically with the real ending. So it might be tempting to want to, but that would be a 19th century affectation. And if you really want to go for it, do whatever you like, but know that that would not have been a Baroque thing to do. And it would have been more the light approach. The elegant ending with the dancers, finishing off. So actually, we're right here at measure 23, and that brings up a very important rhythmic issue, which are these little trills. Normally when we see trill, we want to be trilly. In other words, we want to get in a lot of brrr. But in fact, this is such an interesting rhythm, da ya da dum bum, that if you do a lot of trill, it almost changes the pony run into a run pony, which then distorts Bach's intentions. Or dun da dun da, and we have a little jiggy rhythm in there, which isn't good either. So always the best way to practice these types of rhythms that have trills on them is to do it without the trill and really feel the rhythm as it's meant to be. Do that 5 or 10 times so you really got it, and then only add in as much trill as you can get away with without changing the rhythm at all. So it might just be a little teeny tiny turn, which is perfectly fine, because TR doesn't mean you have to do a certain amount of trill, it just means you have to do something, and that something might just be a teeny tiny turn. There's another one in measure 7. So whatever you do, don't distort the rhythm in those two spots. And there's a couple of interesting bowing differences in this piece as you go along. For example, let's see, measure 14, it has a slur, but measure 3 does not. So if you were looking at, I don't know, a piece by a 19th century composer, you might think, oh, obviously the one without the slur must be missing the slur because, see, there's a slur in this other almost identical place. But in the Baroque era, you would really have the opposite thought, that they're different, so that must be correct because variety was the aesthetic that was very valued. There's another place where you probably shouldn't add a missing slur because it's really not missing. So let's see, in 18 we have a slur. And in 21, so it'd be tempting, or even, but it's kind of cool. I mean, why not? This is a very, energetic movement, actually. So having those little separate 30 seconds, I mean, why not? We've got some in 5 after all, etc. And even if you're going to play that bar lightly, which in fact I do, it still works. And then here we have the only triplet in the whole entire movement that doesn't have a slur. It's actually, so, I think, well, it's very possible that he missed that one slur, but it's possible he wanted those 3 notes to be separate. So I do them separate and just have fun with them. And then go back to all my usual slurs. We already talked a little bit about the importance of thinking about harmony when choosing which beats are more emphasized than other beats so that everything doesn't end up feeling equal. But it's also important to think of the big picture, not just this chord, that chord, the other chord, but are we generally in major or are we generally in minor? If I see you start this movement with knitted brows because it's in a minor key, and then you still have knitted brows in bar 4, then I might think that you're a generally serious person that I probably don't want to hang out with. Well, either that or you missed the memo that it changed to major key. So that's probably more likely to be the case. And we should remember that more or less around the middle of 3, it's major key for a while. Then middle of measure 5, it goes back to minor key. We've got another major key section in the second half, starting in measure 19. And what we have to do is have a different character. It doesn't mean, something as, as unimaginative as, minor key loud, major key soft. It's not about that. It's more about color. It's more about mood. So your minor key might be a little more angsty, maybe, more strong, and then maybe we might be more relaxed and cheerful, or excited and peppy. It could be just as energetic, but a different kind of positive energy. Whatever, it could be any number of levels of energy or gradations of volume, but whatever it is, it has to be a different character. So, darkness is returning. Now, of course, minor key could be sweet and sad, but whatever it is, it's not going to be the same kind of character as major key. Another nice place after we have our minor key stuff ending in 18. And by the way, there's a cadence that because they have the written out appoggiatura, you have a 30-second ta-da. So this one, I'm jumping topics here, but I have to mention this at the end of 11. Should you make a long appoggiatura and play the end of 11 exactly as it's written out at the end of 18? Or the fact that he wrote it out at the end of 18, is that telling you that you should play 11 not that way, or else he would have written it out? You could argue either direction. They both have validity. Anyhow, so back to our major minor thing. So and then major key. The sun came out. But this one doesn't last. Back to minor key. We're not sure which direction it's going, but yeah, it's minor. Question mark note. Oh, wait, there's more. Okay, so that's the kind of thing you have to be thinking about as you're interpreting it, with all the other gobbledygook that balls us up with our bowings and all those big chords and string crosses and all the things that can distract from the music. Set your violin down, think about the music, think about the harmonies, the keys, and figure out what's going on with the gestures and the phrases, and then try to do all of that even with all these difficult notes. There's a surprising harmony at 9, and we have to make sure that we remember that our audience is going to be surprised, even if we've practiced it so much that we know it's coming. We can see it from a mile away, but you have to, so we have B minor, the key, the home key, and then we suddenly have C sharp major. What the heck? Leading to F sharp minor, of course, but that really takes us for surprise. So we have to play it, as a startling moment. So, and then, just thinking about leading chords, like in measure 14, with your tritone, which is unresolved. Leading to that which is resolved, your leading tone here at the middle of, or the beginning of 16. So it's, right, your E7, A to A minor, and then your tritone again. Going back to plain old E minor. So those moments when it's leading to something are super important. Now the doubles should always be played quasi-attacca because they're not really a separate movement. They're a continuation, a variation on the movement that just occurred. Measure for measure, they're the exact same music. So you don't want to do it metronomically, a complete segue, because that wouldn't be so tasteful. 1, 2, 3, 4. That just would sound too square. So you want to let the music breathe, and then, but what you don't want to do, have the music end, have nothingness, then pick your violin back up, and then play a totally new start, because that's also not good. Then they don't feel like a pair anymore. The other 3 movements and their doubles are the exact same tempo, but this one is actually the only cut time double, where it's, both movements of the bourrée are cut time, so they're equally cut time. But this is the only one where the main movement is not cut time and the double is. So I really would make sure that the tempos relate such that the double is exactly twice the speed of the original movement. That's just my opinion. Other people don't feel the same way, and do whatever you like, but do consider it. So there's the exact same shape, everything we talked about in the first movement in terms of the important chords, in terms of the phrase shapes. Everything needs to be the same stuff in the next movement. So when there's an important, well, we were just talking about 14, 16, and 17, right? So let's find those same guys. Middle of 14. Beginning of 16. Resolving. Beginning of 17. Resolving. Cadence and then major key. So the same major key, minor key, it's the exact same music. So one thing that I really like doing is looking at both movements almost on two staves like it's a duet. I laboriously did this, cutting and pasting them together in the 90s. But now that it's so easy to get Finale or Sibelius or whatever, I've actually put it into the computer, and I can see exactly how they line up and make sure that I know which measure relates to which other measure. But of course you can do this by playing back and forth. That was measure 13, and now let's play its twin. Just gives you a lot of clues to really see how they relate. Now there are some slurs, actually tons of slurs in the double, but occasionally there aren't, and occasionally there are 3-note slurs instead of 2-note slurs, and all of this is part of the language that Bach was creating to make it really interesting. And so I would make sure it's not gooey, because then you might as well not even be worrying about slurs. So without going overboard, you don't want to exaggerate. You know, that'd be ridiculous too. But you want to make sure that every 2 notes has just the tiniest, most subtle, sense of, right? And then, of course, the long ideas of the phrases. So these, like, miniature phraselets, 2-note phraselets, of how you're... So it's something, it feels easy to me because I've been doing it for however many years, but something to get used to. You could do it really slow motion. And then gradually speed it up till it's almost imperceptible. But just so you're not smearing them together, 19th century style. And then, of course, we have these places where he's slurring across strings. You can eliminate some of them by, using a romantic style fingering, but if you do want to stay in the first position, which is more colorful, then you have to just kind of fake it. So you have, let's see, measure 2. You could go into third position. But, then you have to worry about shifts. So the question is, do you want to worry about shifts or do you want to worry about string crosses? Either way, you're going to have to worry about something. So I'd say, stay in the first position because it's more beautiful to have that note be on the E string instead of, isn't as logical from a, just a position of color. And so therefore you have to slur that. Well, it's not physically possible because you do have that A string in the way, but if you fake it well enough, it'll be imperceptible. So it's not, you're almost slurring. Now here we have A, G, A. Sometimes it's useful to play a movement like this without the notes. So... that was the first 2 measures. Doing exactly the strings that you would really be on, but without the left hand, to make sure that you're absolutely 100% clear. It's a tricky thing to get used to if you've never done that type of practicing, so do a measure at a time, kind of work it out. If necessary, even write your string names above all the notes, and then play what it says, or finger them in the air above the strings, or sing them or something to help your brain wrap around this. But this can be really useful to make sure that your bow is absolutely clean, so that if there's any uncleanliness in the end, you'll know who the culprit is, which will be the left hand if it's not clean, if you know that your bow is above reproach. Some more string crosses on slurs in the first half would be measure 6, beat 3, or measure 7, the beginning. And I like the open E. You could use a fourth finger to eliminate that one, but you know what? Why not? Once you get used to doing it, it's actually not that scary. Middle of 8. Then we have this strange place in the middle of 11 where you need to put in a hook, or otherwise you'll be all backwards bowing, but he has these 2 notes that don't have a slur. So did he leave one off? No, probably he meant for those notes not to be joined together. So actually there you get to make them sound re-articulated and not make a fake slur across from the G string to the E string, thankfully, because there's no way we could have any fingering that would eliminate that string cross. You can't put your right? You're not going to do that. So, not, but. And again, we have our tag. So basically, everything else, one concept to think of is speaking rather than singing. So if you think about this as, really articulated in the same way as speech would be, very rhetorical, then it all makes sense. But it is happening at twice the speed of the other movement, so you've really got to know what your interpretative ebb and flow is so that it can then happen twice as fast and you don't lose the thread of your thought. So those are some of my thoughts about the B minor Allemanda. Thanks for watching RBP on JSB. I'm Rachel Barton Pine.